what she's really thinking about here is the relationship between God and the soul, and how you can express that incredible closeness, that sort of infinite closeness. And this leads her on to one of her most famous passages, where she talks about God as the mother, as our mother. So this comes out of, a discussion of the Trinity, where she talks about the three persons of the Trinity as three relationships to the soul: the Father, Mother, and the Lord. So the Father, she says, is God the Father is our Father. He's our creator. That's a kind of fatherly act, as she sees it. And then Christ, the second person of the Trinity, is our Mother, who unites and develops the soul, who brings the parts of the soul together, leads them to their development. That's a maternal act. And then the Holy Spirit is God as Lord, which rewards the soul and grants it grace. And so all of these things, they're all true of God, but these are different aspects of his relationship. And it's the idea of God as our mother that's become really famous, because quite rightly, because it's quite beautiful, I think. So she says, "As verily as God is our Father, as verily God is our mother, our kind mother, our gracious mother. For he would all wholly become our mother in all things. He took the ground of his work full low and full mildly in the maiden's womb. Our high God, the sovereign wisdom of all, in this low place he arrayed him and dight him full ready in our poor flesh, himself to do the service and office of motherhood in all things. The mother's service is nearest, readiest, and surest. Nearest, for it is most of kind, readiest, for it is most of love, and surest, for it is most of truth. This office might not, nor could never be done to the full, but by him alone. The mother may lay the child tenderly to her breast, but our tender mother Jesus, he may homely lead us into his blessed breast by his sweet open side, and show therein part of the Godhead and the joys of heaven, with ghostly sureness of endless bliss. This fair, lovely word, mother, it is so kind, so sweet, and so kind of itself, that it may not verily be said of none, nor to none, but of him and to him, who is very mother of life and of all. To the property of motherhood belongeth kind love, wisdom, and knowing, and it is God. The kind, loving mother, that what and knoweth the needs of her child, she keepeth it full tenderly, as the kind and condition of motherhood wills. And as it waxeth in age and in stature, she changeth her working, but not her love. And in this I saw that all our debts that we owe by God's bidding to fatherhood and motherhood is fulfilled in true loving of God. So what she's doing here is quite interesting, because she's not just saying God is our mother, is she? What she's doing is defining what a mother is and what mother's love is like, and then finding how that's true of God. So she's saying a mother's love, mother's service is the nearest, readiest, and surest thing that one can imagine. So the greatest love, the greatest, most of kind. So the most natural thing, the thing that most illustrates the idea of a kind affection. What's innate in human beings. Every mother loves their child. If there is a kind of love like that in the world, she's suggesting, that must also be true of God. It must somehow be a reflection of God's love for us, because everything in the world is to some degree a reflection of that. So the word mother is so beautiful and means such a beautiful thing. It's so sweet and kind of itself that it can't be truly said of anything but of God, because everything so very beautiful must really be true of God. A very abstract way of talking about a very intimate thing, actually. She's defining the word and what it means, and then trying to understand how it's true of God.
I've never heard the church say much about the mother.
Well, it's more common. Yeah. Well, it's much more common in medieval thought than it is now.
Yes.
So, first of all, the idea of God as mother is not completely original to Julian. There are other medieval writers who previously had talked about this idea. It's not much talked about today, but St. Anselm talks about it. Julian really sort of explores all the implications more than most people do, but a number of people make reference to this idea. And the other thing I think is really interesting is that actually motherhood as an idea or as an image would have been everywhere in the medieval church, because everywhere are images like this, Mary and Jesus. And, like with the crucifix, every church would have had an image of a mother and a baby. Motherhood is a very high kind of love. It's a very distinct kind of love, and therefore it must be true of God. I think that depends on a sort of recognition of how important motherhood is, and therefore it has to be true of God's love too, because there can't be something so good and true that isn't true, isn't true of God. Yeah. So what she does that's interesting is she finds a number of ways Jesus is like a mother. So I've given you a couple here. One is, Jesus in the crucifixion, he opens his side to us. He kind of bares his body as a mother might lay a child to her breast. So that's kind of coming out of, again, iconography of the crucifixion. He feeds the mother feeds the child as Christ feeds us in the Eucharist or with his body. So there are lots of ways in which Christ's interactions with the soul kind of reflect or are mapped onto motherhood. But I think what she's really saying at the end here is that all the debts we owe by God's bidding to fatherhood and motherhood is fulfilled in the loving of God. What she's kind of saying is it's motherhood that's the image of God, not the other way around. It's human motherhood which is reflecting in its particular kind of intimacy and care and love that sort of that aspect of God. So it's not like she's using mother as an image. It's nature that's the metaphor, and God that's the reality. What would have been very relevant is how highly prized motherhood was in the medieval church. Mary, for the medieval church, Mary was the supreme human being below God. So images of her as a mother are absolutely everywhere. The other thing you get, particularly in late medieval tradition, is addition to mother figures like the mother of the Virgin Mary. So St. Anne, who is often shown in these kind of maternal roles here, teaching her daughter Mary to read, or as grandmother to Christ. This is Mary and baby Jesus and Anne. So these are images of sacred motherhood. They're not pagan, they're thoroughly Christian, but they are reflecting that kind of sanctification of motherhood, the idea of motherhood as a sacred thing, or a female principle as a sacred thing. I don't know if you can see it very well. Because this comes from Norfolk, and this is a screen showing a particular Norfolk tradition, or something very popular in Norfolk in Julian's time, so very much her kind of world, where you see this is Mary and her sisters and their children. So Mary and Jesus in the middle, and then her sister and 2 children on this side, and like 4 children on the other side. So lots and lots of sacred mothers. This is from a rood screen in a church in Ranworth in Norfolk, which was in the Lady Chapel, so the chapel dedicated to Mary. And this is where the women of the parish would go after childbirth to give thanks for a safe delivery. So it's very much a kind of mother-focused, image, and it's elevating motherhood to this incredibly high status. And this is a very, these women are crowned and they're wearing, they've got halos, but it's also a very kind of everyday and domestic, a marriage of the two. The children have got toys, they're feeding, they're being breastfed in the middle there. And when she talks about God feeding us like a child, holding us like a child, she talks about a mother chastising her child very gently as appropriate for its age. These are the kind of images of motherhood that she would have had in mind. And this is the kind of thing that would have been just everywhere in medieval churches. I think it's quite hard for us to picture that, how prevalent these images would have been, because often these were destroyed at the Reformation or by later iconoclasts, maybe in part because they elevate women to this high status. They are particularly, for later ages, they've become particularly controversial. But in the Middle Ages, for medieval women would have seen themselves in these images, certainly. And this was actually, this devotion to St. Anne and her daughters and their children was especially popular in East Anglia. So it may be that one reason Julian is interested just in the idea of motherhood, of God as mother, is because she was familiar with these kinds of images or with these kinds of ideas.